In a quiet American town, police discovered a horrific scene. Two bodies were found in the house where an elderly woman lived with her grandson and his mother. Signs of violence, blood on the walls, and the chaos all around indicated that behind this family's outward calm lay a true nightmare. The Wilkins family lived in a small town in the southern United States, in a one-story house on the outskirts. The house seemed ordinary: a well-kept garden, a white picket fence, a neatly trimmed lawn. Behind this facade lay a story that would later become the subject of investigation by police, psychiatrists, and journalists. The house was home to 68-year-old Ellen Wilkins, her daughter Sarah, and her 16-year-old grandson Joshua. After Sarah's divorce from her husband, Ellen became the dominant figure in the family. She took on most of the care for her grandson, claiming that his mother was failing to cope. At first glance, this seemed like a sign of concern. Ellen cooked meals, helped with his schoolwork, and took Joshua to doctor's appointments. However, over time, her behavior became increasingly intrusive. Ellen interfered in all of her grandson's affairs, deciding who he could be friends with, what books he could read, what he could wear. Sarah tried to object, but a pattern gradually developed in the household in which her grandmother had the final say. Neighbors noticed that Ellen rarely went out without her grandson. They were always together, at the store, at church, at school events. Some found this touching, but others spoke of overprotection. Joshua, according to his classmates, seemed withdrawn. He avoided conversations about his personal life and didn't invite friends to his home. The relationship between his mother and grandmother gradually worsened. Sarah, a nurse, tried to spend time with her son, but she encountered resistance from her mother. Every time Sarah suggested going somewhere with Joshua, Ellen found an excuse not to let him go. He's tired. He needs to study for school. It's not safe. According to friends, Sarah tried to discuss the situation with her mother. She said she felt distant from her son, that his grandmother was too controlling. But the conversations ended in arguments. Ellen believed she was the only one capable of properly caring for Joshua and called her daughter irresponsible. Over time, Joshua became embroiled in a conflict between his mother and grandmother. This was a difficult ordeal for him. At school, he became irritable and sometimes aggressive. Teachers noted that the boy was intelligent, but appeared tired and depressed. The investigation later focused particularly on episodes in which Ellen demonstrated excessive affection for her grandson. This wasn't overtly expressed, but it was evident in gestures and words. She would hold his hand for too long, straighten his clothes in front of others, and stroke his hair. Several times, neighbors saw her hug the teenager too tightly, and this seemed not like normal care but something extreme. Sarah increasingly considered moving with her son to another city. She discussed it with her friends, saying, "We need to save Josh." But she feared conflict with her mother and put off the decision. In late spring, a few months before the tragedy, the situation escalated. Joshua began dating a classmate, which sparked a major argument. Ellen spoke out strongly against it, believing the girl was a bad influence on her grandson. Shouting erupted in the house. Sarah tried to intercede for her son, but his grandmother insisted that the boy was still too young for a relationship. During this period, Joshua began leaving home more often to spend time with his girlfriend. This was a blow to Ellen. She complained to neighbors that he was being taken away from his family and accused her daughter of ruining their bond. The first chapter concludes the family's life before the crime. It clearly shows how ordinary care turned into obsession, and how a home that seemed outwardly prosperous became a place of constant tension and hidden conflicts. Ellen's obsession became more and more obvious with each passing month. While her control over her grandson's life could previously be explained by concern, now even neighbors and acquaintances began to notice the oddities. She paid less and less attention to her own daughter and focused all her energy on Joshua. When the boy began spending more time with a classmate, tensions in the household increased dramatically. Ellen didn't hide her irritation, calling the girl slutty and unreliable. She told her grandson that she was using him, that her interest in him was superficial. In conversations with neighbors, Ellen claimed that no one could love Josh the way she did. These words later formed the basis for expert psychiatric reports, which described her as obsessive-compulsive. Sarah tried to defend her son's right to privacy, but every step she took was met with fierce resistance from her mother. Arguments occurred almost daily, loud shouting, mutual accusations. Her grandson found himself at the center of the conflict and, according to classmates, increasingly seemed depressed. Sometimes he said it was impossible to breathe at home. A key detail was the episodes in which Ellen showed excessive physical affection toward her grandson. She often sat close to him, adjusting his clothes and touching his face and hair. To others, this might have seemed like ordinary affection from an elderly woman, but the teenager himself experienced these actions as painful. The investigation documents include his friend's words. Joshua complained that his grandmother was acting strangely and sometimes hugging him so tightly that he couldn't escape. One of the incidents recorded by the police concerned an evening when Sarah came home and found his mother in her son's room. Ellen was sitting on the bed next to Joshua, stroking his shoulder and quietly talking to him. The teenager looked embarrassed. Sarah reacted sharply, and a fight broke out between the women. Ellen claimed she was comforting the boy, while Sarah accused her of violating her privacy. This incident became a turning point. From that day on, his mother increasingly tried to convince her son that they needed to move. Ellen's obsession also manifested itself in her constant control. She set rules. Joshua had to return home immediately after school, and she checked his phone herself, inquiring about his messages. Several times, Sarah tried to forbid her mother from interfering in the teenager's personal affairs, but was met with a firm refusal. Ellen claimed she was acting for his own good. Soon, even more disturbing moments emerged. The grandson told friends that his grandmother was asking him intimate questions, asking how he spends time with his girlfriend, whether they kiss. This embarrassed the teenager, and he increasingly shared details of his life with anyone. By midsummer, the situation had become critical. Sarah was seriously considering moving to another state. She consulted with colleagues, looked for work, and even considered renting. But every time she tried to talk to her mother, a fight ensued. Ellen threatened not to let her take her grandson, even declaring, "I'd rather die than give him up." Tensions escalated. Neighbors heard screams coming from the house, and one woman called the police, fearing violence. However, the officers who arrived merely issued a warning. The house had been quiet when they arrived. This episode later became further proof that warning signs were being ignored. Ellen continued to isolate Joshua. She tried to persuade him to leave the relationship, convincing him that his girlfriend would betray him. The teenager found himself trapped in a vicious cycle. His mother demanded independence. His grandmother demanded complete devotion. He himself felt trapped and increasingly expressed dissatisfaction. By this time, his relationship with his grandmother had become ambivalent. On the one hand, he was attached to her and financially dependent, but on the other, he felt pressure and discomfort. The internal conflict intensified, and close friends noted that he had become nervous, sometimes flaring up without cause. The chapter concludes with a description of the period when Ellen's obsession had already crossed the line. Her actions showed signs of a pathological attachment, and an atmosphere of constant tension developed in the family. All of this was bringing about a tragic outcome that could no longer be stopped. By early autumn, the situation in the Wilkins household had reached a critical point. Any event related to Joshua became a source of conflict. Sarah continued to insist that her son should have more freedom, while Ellen increasingly asserted her authority in the household. The family atmosphere was tense, and every day ended in a quarrel. Situations involving Joshua's girlfriend became particularly tense. Sarah tried to maintain the relationship, believing it to be natural for a teenager. Ellen, however, saw the girl as a threat to her influence. She forbade her grandson from seeing his girlfriend, and once even called her parents, accusing their daughter of corrupting the boy. This act sparked a new round of arguments and completely undermined the trust between mother and daughter. Joshua found himself at the epicenter of these contradictions. He left home more and more often, trying to spend time outside or with friends. But every time he was late, his grandmother would throw a tantrum and fresh accusations would be leveled at Sarah. The teenager felt crushed. On the one hand, he wanted independence. On the other, he couldn't openly oppose his grandmother, who wielded too much influence. The relationship between the women grew increasingly hostile. Sarah tried to limit her mother's complete control over her son, but Ellen perceived this as a betrayal. Conversations ended in mutual insults and sometimes even threats. Neighbors recalled increasingly loud screams being heard in the house, accompanied by the sounds of slamming doors and breaking dishes. Sometimes Joshua witnessed scenes in which his mother and grandmother literally fought for control over his life. In one such episode, Sarah tried to take her son's phone from his mother to regain his privacy, but Ellen snatched the device from her daughter's hands and accused her of being irresponsible. For the teenager, such scenes were unbearable. He screamed that he was tired of their fighting, but neither woman heard him. As the conflict escalated, more disturbing signs began to emerge. Joshua told friends that his grandmother was increasingly controlling him, even at night. She would enter his room without knocking, check where he was sleeping, and ask intrusive questions. Sometimes she would touch his face or hair, justifying it as concern, but the teenager himself felt it as an intrusion. These episodes intensified his feelings of hopelessness. During this period, Sarah was actively seeking a way out. She seriously considered moving to another state, but each time she encountered fierce resistance from her mother. Ellen threatened to refuse to let her take her grandson, insisting that he belonged to her. Sarah shared her concerns with colleagues and friends, but admitted that she was afraid of open conflict. The emotional tension in the house reached a breaking point. Any word could trigger a breakdown. Ellen increasingly began screaming, blaming her daughter for the destruction of the family. Sarah, tired of the constant pressure, responded with harsh words. Joshua, cornered, became both a witness and a victim of this confrontation. By late autumn, the family crisis had reached a point where tragedy was only a matter of time. Ellen's control had reached absolute levels. She scrutinized her grandson's every move, limited his interactions, and simultaneously increased the pressure on her daughter. Unable to bear the strain, Sarah increasingly announced she would leave, but she failed to take decisive action. This chapter captures the moment when the conflict escalated into open hostility. The family found itself in a state of constant confrontation, and any small thing could spark a catastrophe. The tragedy unfolded at the beginning of winter. That day, Sarah returned from work later than usual. According to her colleagues, she seemed tired, but mentioned in conversation that she intended to have a serious talk with her mother about moving. For her, this decision was her last chance to save her son and regain control of his life. When Sarah entered the house, the atmosphere was already tense. Ellen was in the kitchen with Joshua. The teenager looked dejected. His grandmother was once again trying to persuade him to break up with his girlfriend, promising that it would be best for both of them. Sarah tried to intervene, but the conversation quickly escalated into shouting matches. According to the investigation, it was at this point that the first physical contact occurred. Sarah tried to pull her son out of the kitchen, but Ellen blocked her path. The women began pushing, and dishes fell to the floor. Joshua tried to separate them, but only escalated the tension. During the confrontation, Ellen grabbed a kitchen knife. She later claimed she only wanted to scare her daughter, but the situation spiraled out of control. Sarah screamed, demanding her mother lower the weapon. Joshua stepped between them, trying to stop his grandmother. That's when the first wound occurred. The blade struck the teenager's shoulder, and he cried out. Blood instantly stained his shirt. This caused Sarah to panic and rush to her son's side. But at that moment, Ellen struck her daughter again, this time in the chest. The situation quickly turned deadly. Sarah fell to the floor, exhausted. Joshua, despite being wounded, tried to knock the knife out of his grandmother's hands. Neighbors later reported hearing loud screams and the sounds of a struggle. The fight lasted for several minutes. Eventually, Ellen struck several more blows, one to Sarah's neck, another to her grandson, who tried to defend his mother. Police determined that Sarah died almost instantly from massive blood loss. Joshua remained alive for some time. His body was found in the hallway. He had tried to escape the house, but his strength failed him just a few meters from the door. Ellen, according to investigators, made no attempt to call an ambulance. Instead, she sat next to her grandson's body, clutching his hand to her chest. When officers, summoned by neighbors, arrived at the house, they found the elderly woman in a state of shock. Her clothes were completely covered in blood, her face expressionless. The scene of the crime was horrific. Broken dishes littered the kitchen, and blood covered the floor and walls. In the hallway where Joshua fell, there were traces of his attempts to reach the door. Experts described the incident as an extremely brutal attack, committed in a state of passion or mental illness. Neighbors reported hearing desperate screams and bangs that evening. Some tried to ring the doorbell, but upon hearing the continuing struggle, they called the police. However, when officers arrived, they found only the aftermath. Ellen was detained at the scene. She did not resist arrest or deny her actions. Her first words, captured on police cameras, were, "He will always be with me." These words became key in the subsequent analysis of her mental state. A forensic examination later confirmed that both victims had suffered multiple stab wounds. Sarah had been stabbed at least 5 times, and Joshua had been stabbed 3 times, one of which was fatal. Evidence of a struggle indicated that the teenager had attempted to actively resist but was unable to overcome his grandmother's physical strength in her rage. This chapter captures the moment when a family conflict reached an irreparable point. Over the course of a single evening, years of escalating tension and obsession led to a tragic outcome. A double murder that shocked not only neighbors, but the entire local community. After her arrest, Ellen Wilkins was immediately taken to the police station. She showed no aggression and made no attempt to defend herself. According to officers, she appeared detached and spoke little. Her main statements boiled down to the fact that Joshua will now be with her forever. These statements immediately pointed to a possible mental disorder among investigators. The investigation began with interviews with neighbors and acquaintances of the family. Many of them confirmed hearing arguments and shouting in the house over the past few months. Several noted that Sarah had tried to protect her son, but had encountered resistance from his mother. Sarah's own complaints to colleagues were also recorded. She had mentioned her intention to leave, but was afraid of conflict. Particular attention was paid to episodes of Ellen's excessive attachment to her grandson. Joshua's classmates and his girlfriend reported that he frequently complained of excessive control and invasion of personal boundaries. The dossier included his comments about grandmother not letting me breathe. This evidence supported the theory of pathological dependency. The forensic examination determined that Sarah had suffered 5 stab wounds, 2 of which were fatal. Joshua had 3 wounds, including a blow to the chest, which was the cause of death. The examiners noted that the nature of the injuries indicated a series of blows, not a random attack. Ellen remained calm during interrogation. She didn't deny the murder, but explained her actions as a desire to protect her grandson from bad influences. When asked about her daughter, she replied that she destroyed everything and wanted to take the boy away. This testimony reinforced the investigators' belief that the motive for the crime was obsession. The trial generated widespread public attention. Journalists covered the proceedings daily, emphasizing how unusual the case was. An elderly woman had committed a double murder in a family where everything appeared to be fine. Ellen sat calmly in the courtroom, almost emotionless. Court-appointed psychiatrists diagnosed her with a severe personality disorder, characterized by pathological attachment and an inability to accept the independence of loved ones. They noted that her behavior went beyond typical overprotectiveness and was destructive. The jury found Ellen guilty of the premeditated murder of 2 people. However, taking into account expert testimony, the court sentenced her not to life imprisonment, but to confinement in a specialized psychiatric hospital. The sentence was controversial. Some considered it too lenient, while others considered it necessary given the defendant's mental state. The case's final chord came several months later, when the investigative materials became public. They revealed that the tragedy was the culmination of a long-standing conflict rooted in a destructive obsession. The Wilkins home, seemingly ordinary on the surface, became a symbol of how family problems, left unaddressed, can lead to irreparable disaster. The Wilkins family story revealed how obsessive attachment and destructive conflicts within the home led to tragedy. Two generations fell victim to an obsession, and their seemingly ordinary life turned into a brutal murder, becoming the subject of an investigation and public debate.